I dropped out of college the first 2, 3 times because it interfered with being a hippie, and to me that was more important at the time. But I eventually did finish while I was working at the Energy Commission. My trajectory to where I am was a little strange. I was a builder, and then became a building inspector, mostly because I was losing touch with my daughter, being away so much as a builder. So I took a huge cut in pay and became a building inspector, so that I could be around more. And within 13 months, I was a chief building inspector, putting in 55 hours a week, rebuilding the department. And after a few years of that, and realizing, okay, that wasn't giving me a whole lot more time with my daughter, I decided to go work for the state, because you can't do overtime with the state, right? But within a few months, I was helping to start 2 national organizations and putting in 55 hours a week again, and I finally realized it's not the job. And I just accepted about myself that I'm not that efficient, and what most people do in 40 hours a week, it takes me 55. When I went to work for the Energy Commission, it was mostly because I had been something of a troublemaker and kept showing up at the commission with complaints. As the chief building inspector for Humboldt County, I recognized that the requirements for that county were inappropriate compared to the requirements elsewhere in terms of the energy code. And so I kept coming to the meetings and complaining. And finally, the head of the standards office said to me, well, if you don't like it, come fix it. And so I did. I took a job. I went to work on the residential standards in the standards office at the commission. And one of the first things that it became clear needed to be fixed was getting fair, accurate, credible ratings for windows. So I helped to start the National Fenestration Rating Council. And I don't know, feel free to cut this out, but an interesting story related to that was that I had no idea what I was doing. And I went to the first couple meetings of the group that was forming the National Fenestration Rating Council. And at that point, I had already drafted out an idea of how we could get fair, accurate, credible ratings in California, unaware that anybody else was thinking about this anywhere else in the world. So when I went to one of those first meetings, they decided, okay, well, we're going to approach this like marketers. So we need to figure out who our customers are for this thing that we're creating, which is a rating. Customers are obviously the state energy offices, the people that write code. So we got anybody like that here? Okay, Nehemiah, you're from the Energy Commission. What do you need? And I said, we need a U value that is believable. Great. When do you need it? I said, August. And this was March. The guy who was running the meeting threw his pencil and it stuck in the ceiling of the place, because he said, we've been working on this for 8 years. You think we can do it in the next 8 months? And I said, that's all right. I've got a plan right here. We'll just go ahead and do this in California. And I didn't know it, but I was entirely bluffing because the commission would not have backed me on that. But I didn't know it because I was too naive. So NFRC had a U-factor rating procedure in place by August because they felt like their feet were put to the fire. And we now have a national rating system that works for windows wherever you are. After working on the standards for a while, the chairman of the Energy Commission asked me if I would come to work for him as an advisor. And so my last 4 years at the commission, I was advisor for 2 of those, to Chairman Imbrecht and then for Commissioner Bob Lowry after Chairman Imbrecht left. And in that position, I helped to start the Cool Roof Rating Council also, and actually was the first chair of it. I left the commission in '98 and went to work for Heshong Mahon Group as a consultant. And as a consultant, I helped to start the Savings by Design program, which is the statewide energy efficiency program for commercial buildings. And after we got that going, I helped to start the first utility-sponsored multifamily new construction program. And we were oversubscribed within 5 months of starting it. And then we started for another utility, and we were fully subscribed within 6 months. And then the utility decided, why do we have this third party doing this stuff? And they took it in-house, and it became the model for the multifamily program that currently runs in California. Working on that, I got very concerned about how we integrate the needs of low-income households in what we do in standards and programs. And my life since 1999 has been revolving around affordable multifamily. And I have developed a few tools that help in that instance. One of the biggest issues was if in affordable multifamily, if the owner invested in energy efficiency, they got no return on their investment. So it really wasn't an investment, it was a gift. So I helped to create a tool called the California Utility Allowance Calculator, which gives a very accurate estimate of what the tenant's energy costs will be. And that is used now to help set rents so that owners can charge a higher rent if they make the apartments more energy efficient, so that tenants pay less in utilities. So the tenants are still paying the same amount, they're just getting a higher level of comfort and usefulness, and the money goes to the owner of the property rather than to the utility. In multifamily, we have moved tremendously in the last 15 years. We've had residential energy standards in California since 1978. The first time that the standards ever recognized a specific difference for multifamily was in 2005. And that was a difference in central domestic hot water. Prior to 2005, if you had a central domestic hot water system, the software basically assumed that boiler was outside the door of your apartment, regardless of where your apartment was in that building. In other words, the distribution losses were entirely ignored. We have made, in the interim, we've made a number of other changes to the standards that are specific to multifamily. But we still have standards that are developed primarily for single-family homes or primarily for commercial buildings, and then shoehorned onto multifamily. And what I'm working on and what I'm passionate about now is trying to make sure that we have building standards that are designed for and therefore appropriate for multifamily buildings and the differences between those and single family. One of the primary differences comes out in indoor air quality. And you have different sets of standards, and ASHRAE is 62.1 and 62.2, that mean as soon as your building gets over 3 stories to 4 stories, you've got a full different set of requirements, and there's no sense to that. The apartments in a 16-story building need the same indoor air quality that apartments in a 2-story building do. So my next thrust on that is to try and get our standards to be based on good indoor air quality rather than meeting a couple of prescriptive requirements that are supposed to get you good indoor air quality. In other words, minimizing leakage and providing a certain amount of ventilation. We should have ventilation requirements that are based on you have good indoor air or the ventilation system comes on, rather than, well, if we can give you this many CFM, then you should be fine. To illustrate what I mean about having good indoor air quality rather than meeting prescriptive requirements, for commercial buildings in California, demand-controlled ventilation is it's in the code. So if the CO2 levels get too high in a building or in a room, the ventilation system comes on. What I'm talking about for multifamily is something similar to that, but it doesn't just look at CO2. It also looks at CO. We have existing apartments that have combustion appliances in them that were just fine as long as these apartments were really, really leaky. But now that we're getting things tighter, and renovations on multifamily buildings do end up making them tighter typically, putting in better windows, adding insulation, caulking things. As we do that, we need to know that we are not making the air inside unhealthy. And the way to do that is not, as in commercial demand control ventilation, not just measure what it does, which is CO2, but measures CO and CO2 and moisture and VOCs, volatile organic compounds, so that we know that the air, we know when the air is not healthy for people and the ventilation system comes on at those points. We should be delivering good air, not delivering buildings that meet certain prescriptive requirements in terms of leakage and ventilation rates.